I never thought staying after class could change both our lives. But that Thursday, when I saw Professor Harmon 50 years old, brilliant, completely alone staring at me from across an empty classroom, I knew. Loneliness recognizes loneliness. Look, I know it might seem strange to start a story like this, but there are moments in life when you just know something is going to change. And that look was exactly that. One of those moments you feel in your entire body before you can even understand it with your mind. My name is Daniel. I'm 23, a literature student at State University. I've always been kind of that quiet kid, you know? The type who sits in the middle of the room, not front row to avoid looking like a teacher's pet, but not back row either where you disappear. Just there, trying to slip through without making waves. But there's one thing about me I learned to hide very well. I recognize loneliness. Not the temporary loneliness, the kind of someone who's just alone in the moment. I recognize deep loneliness. The loneliness of someone who learned to live alone because it's safer than risking being truly seen. I know this because I live it. I grew up in a small family. Mom worked a lot. Dad left when I was 7. No siblings. I learned early to handle things on my own, to keep my feelings to myself. And then around 15, I realized I was gay, which pretty much cemented the isolation. Not because Mom was homophobic. She didn't even know. It's just that I figured out young that being different meant keeping your guard up, watching more than participating, learning to be alone even when surrounded by people. And that's exactly why I noticed Professor Harmon. It was the 3rd week of classes that semester. Contemporary literature, Tuesdays and Thursdays, 2 in the afternoon. The class had about 30 students, most of them just there for the credits. But I really liked the subject. I always liked to read, to understand stories, to see how people build meaning through words. Professor Harmon came in that first day with that typical professor walk-tired, kind of resigned, like he already expected half the class would zone out. He had neat gray hair, black framed glasses that sat a little crooked on his face. That casual elegance some older guys have, you know? A button-up shirt with the sleeves rolled, dark jeans, nice leather shoes that looked both comfortable and expensive. But it wasn't his appearance that caught my attention. It was his gaze. He looked at the class, but it was as if he didn't truly see anyone. There was a weariness there that went beyond the physical. It was a weariness of the soul, you know? As if he had given up waiting for anything interesting to happen. As if he had already accepted that he would spend the entire semester talking to himself. And I recognized that immediately. Because that's exactly how I felt most of the time. The first few weeks were normal. He taught. I paid attention. I did the readings. But I started noticing small things. Details no one else seemed to notice. Like, during breaks, while everyone else went out for smoke or coffee, he'd stay in the room, alone, eating something he brought, scrolling through his phone. Not the vibe of someone who wanted solitude, you know? More like someone with nowhere else to be, no one waiting for him. Or like his office. I went by once to turn in a paper after class hours. The door was cracked open. And inside? Nothing. No photos, no personal stuff. Just books, papers, a coffee mug. No signs of a real person. No life outside those walls. Or like when we discussed texts about relationships, love, human connection. The way he talked about it, there was this distance. Like he was describing a country he'd heard about but never visited. Like they were just abstract concepts, not actual things he knew. And the strangest thing, no one else seemed to notice. To everyone else, he was just another professor. Competent, a bit bored, teaching because it was his job. Nothing more than that. But I saw because I knew that loneliness. I lived in it every day. It was in the 5th week that the first thing happened. The first crack in that invisible wall between us. We were discussing Love in the Time of Cholera by Gabriel Garcia Marquez. And there was a part of the book I had become obsessed with, that idea that we can spend our whole lives waiting for love, building a version of it in our heads that might never come true. I raised my hand, a rare thing for me. Normally I just listened, took notes, kept my head down. But that day I felt I needed to speak. "Professor," I said, voice a bit shaky. "Isn't there something lonely about that? Like Florentino spends decades in love with Fermina, but does he actually know her? Or is he in love with who he thinks she is? And isn't the loneliness of loving an idea safer than the risk of loving a real person?" The room fell silent, and Professor Harmon looked at me. It wasn't that quick glance from a teacher to a student. It was a real look. A look that lasted too long. A look that said, "You understand. That," he said slowly, taking off his glasses to clean them on his shirt, "might be the smartest thing I've heard anyone say about this book in 15 years. My heart pounded. It wasn't just the compliment, it was the way he said it, as if I had touched on something no one had ever touched before. As if I had seen something that was invisible to everyone but him. "You're absolutely right," he continued, putting his glasses back on. "There's comfort in being alone. You control the story. You decide who you are, what you feel, what everything means. But real intimacy? You risk being known. And for most people, that's terrifying. He said that looking directly at me, and I felt, with absolute certainty, that he wasn't talking about Florentino. He was talking about himself, and maybe about me too. After that class, something changed. He started noticing me in a different way. When I arrived, he'd give a small nod. When I asked questions, he'd take longer to answer, as if he truly wanted to make sure I understood. When class ended and everyone rushed out, he'd take his time packing up, as if he was waiting for me to linger too. And I did linger. Not because I had a plan, not because I knew what I was doing, but because for the first time in forever, I didn't feel alone. And that feeling was intoxicating. One day, 2 weeks after that discussion about the book, I had a question about an essay we had to turn in. Everyone else had already left. I hesitated, but eventually went over to his desk. "Professor, sorry to bother you," I said, my voice softer than I intended. I wanted to ask a question about the assignment. He looked up, and there was something in his gaze, a mix of surprise and something more, something akin to relief. "Of course," he said. "Have a seat." I grabbed a chair and sat next to him instead of across the desk. And for the first time, I noticed his smell: coffee, old books, a subtle woody cologne, the smell of an adult, of stability. Nothing like the beer and cheap cologne smell of campus life. I asked my question. He answered. But the conversation didn't stop there. He asked what else I was reading. I told him about some books I'd bought at a used bookstore. He smiled a real smile, not that polite professor smile. "You read beyond what's required," he said. "That's rare." "Yeah," I said, not quite knowing what to say. "I've always liked it. Books are easier than people sometimes." I don't know why I said that. It was automatic, too honest. The kind of thing you only say when you let your guard down without realizing it. He looked at me for a long moment, and then said so quietly I almost didn't hear him, "Yes, people are complicated." And in that moment, I knew. He wasn't just lonely. He'd checked out from people. He'd chosen the safety of books, of ideas, of distance. Built a life that looked fine on paper but was actually empty, just like I was starting to build mine. I don't know how long we stayed there, in that empty room, with the afternoon sun streaming through the window and creating those stripes of light on the floor. It couldn't have been more than 15 minutes, but it felt like an eternity. It felt like a suspended space where normal rules didn't apply. When I finally left, my heart was pounding, and I couldn't stop thinking about that phrase. People are complicated. It wasn't just what he said. It was how he said it, with a weight, with an entire story behind it, with a sadness I recognized because it lived inside me too. And I started paying more attention. In the following days, I watched. Never ate with other professors. Always early in, late leaving like he wasn't eager to get home. Never mentioned anything personal. No weekend plans, no friends, no family. Nothing. And the more I observed, the more I saw my own life reflected in him. I also always ate alone. I also never had weekend plans worth mentioning. I had also built a life that seemed to work, but deep down it was just safe, controlled, empty. That's when I realized something terrifying. I was looking at my future. Keep going like this, and in 30 years I'd be him. Successful, respected, completely alone. Resigned that real connection wasn't in the cards. That loving stories was safer than living one. And that realization terrified me. But it also gave me a strange courage. Because if I was seeing my future in him, maybe he had seen his past in me. Maybe that recognition was mutual. Maybe the loneliness I saw in him was the same loneliness he saw in me. And maybe, just maybe, we didn't have to be alone forever. The following week, he returned our essays. When it was my turn, he placed the paper on my desk and said quietly enough for only me to hear, "You're the only student who seems to truly feel what we're reading." It wasn't an academic compliment. It was something more. It was recognition. It was connection. It was vulnerability. It was an invitation. I took the paper. I looked at it, and for the first time I held his gaze. I didn't look away. I didn't pretend I hadn't heard. I simply looked back and let him see that I understood, that I saw him, that I recognized that loneliness because it was mine too. The other students didn't notice anything. To them, it was just another teacher's comment. But between the two of us, something had been said. Something irreversible. In the days that followed, the tension between us grew. It wasn't sexual, at least not yet. It was something deeper. It was the recognition of two people who had spent too much time alone, finally realizing that maybe they didn't have to be. I started staying after almost every class. Always with an excuse, a question, a doubt, a comment about the reading. But we both knew it wasn't about that. It was about those 15 minutes when we could let our guard down. When we didn't have to pretend. He started sharing small things. Never anything too personal, but small pieces of humanity. Like he had spent the weekend rereading Dostoevsky because he'd forgotten how good it was, or that he'd discovered a new coffee shop on his way home and the coffee was decent. Small things. But for someone who never shared anything, that was huge. And I started sharing too. I told him I lived alone in a tiny apartment, that my mom called once a week and we never really knew what to talk about, that I had read 100 Years of Solitude 3 times, and each time I felt more alone afterward. He laughed at that last part, a real laugh, and said, "That's the problem with Garcia Marquez. He makes loneliness seem so poetic that you almost forget it hurts." And in that moment I saw something in his eyes, a pain, an ancient, deep pain that he had carried for so long it had become a part of him. And I wanted to do something, to say something, to break down that wall he had built around himself. But I didn't know how, until that Thursday arrived. The Thursday that changed everything. It was a normal class. We were discussing Clarice Lispector, The Hour of the Star. And at the end of the class, he made a comment that echoed in the room after everyone had left. Macabea doesn't die from being run over. She dies from never having been seen, from having spent her entire life invisible, even to herself. And when he said that, he looked at me, just for a second. But it was enough, because I knew he wasn't just talking about the character. Class ended. Everyone left, and I stayed. This time, I didn't pretend to have a question. I didn't invent an excuse. I simply stayed. I slowly packed my things as the room emptied. And when the last student left and the door closed, I looked at him. He was standing by the desk, organizing papers in a way that clearly didn't need to be done at that moment, avoiding my gaze. But I could see the tension in his shoulders. I could see that he knew something was going to happen. I stood up, walked to his desk. My heart was beating so hard I was sure he could hear it. "Professor," I said, and my voice came out firmer than I expected. "I stayed because I need to say something." He finally looked at me, and in his gaze I saw fear and hope in equal measure. "I see you," I said, "and nobody else does. You eat alone. There are no photos in your office. You talk about love and connection like they're things from books, not real life. And I know all that because I'm the same way." He remained completely still, as if any movement would break the moment. "I'm 23, I continued, and I've already accepted being alone, decided it's safer, that people are too complicated, that I can't do this. And then I look at you and I see exactly who I'll be in 30 years if I don't change." He took a deep breath, took off his glasses, ran a hand over his face. "Daniel," he said, and it was the first time he'd said my name like that. Not teacher to student, but person to person. "You don't know what you're saying." "I know exactly what I'm saying," I replied, "and I know you know it too." And then something happened that I will never forget. He looked at me, really looked, no defenses, no walls, and said, "You're the only student who actually feels what we're reading. You know why? Because you're the only person in years who seems to feel anything at all. And that's dangerous for me. Because I stopped feeling a long time ago. The room fell into absolute silence. Only the distant sound of someone walking in the hallway, the afternoon sun creating those golden stripes on the floor. And there, in that suspended space, we both knew. Loneliness had recognized loneliness, and neither of us knew what to do with it." He looked at me for a moment. Then he sighed, not a tired professor's sigh, but the kind of exhausted sigh someone lets out when they've been holding something in for years. And that's when I got it. That feeling between us, it wasn't about class, wasn't about literature or analysis. It was about him. The real person, the man I'd been watching every day, hiding behind that perfect tie and professor routine. He let the pen drop onto the table. The sound echoed in the silence of the empty room. "No," he said, and his voice was different now. Lower, more real. "No, I'm not okay." My heart raced, because that wasn't a teacher's answer. That was what someone says when they finally drop the act. "I'm tired," he continued, running his hands over his face in a way that made him look much older than 50. "Tired of performing, tired of having all the answers, tired of coming in here every day and faking like I have my life figured out." I didn't know what to say. What do you say when someone you've always seen as controlled, competent, together suddenly falls apart in front of you? "Professor Harmon." "David," he interrupted me. "My name is David. I think we're past pretending there's professional distance between us when you see me like nobody else does." David, he had a name. Obviously he did. But hearing him say it, giving me permission to see him as a person, not authority, made something inside me break open. "You're the first person in years," he said, staring at me with tired but honest eyes, "who asked if I was okay, and actually meant it." My throat tightened. I knew that feeling, being invisible while everyone looks at you, surrounded by people and completely alone. "How long?" I asked, and my voice came out softer than I expected. He laughed, bitter, empty. "How long have I been alone? How long have I been faking it? Or how long since I woke up and realized when this became such an empty performance? Any of them. He was silent for a moment, looking out the window. Outside, the campus was empty. The afternoon sun cast long shadows on the trees. Everything seemed suspended, as if the whole world was waiting for him to finally tell the truth. 7 years, he said. Divorced 7 years ago. She left because I loved work more than her. And the worst part? She was right. I didn't expect it. That raw honesty. That exposed pain. So I buried myself in work, he continued. It was easier. I knew how to do it. Because if I stopped and actually looked at my life, I'd have to admit I built this whole thing, and I'm alone in it. He turned to me, and for the first time since I came in that Thursday, there was nothing between us. No teacher mask. No competence act. I'm around people all day, he said, voice trembling slightly. 30 students a class. Faculty meetings, conferences, and I've never felt so invisible. And that's when something in me broke. I knew that invisibility. Lived it every day. I get it, I said, the words spilling out. I know exactly what you mean. He looked at me, half surprise, half hope, like he didn't think anyone would actually get it. I've always been the outsider, I continued, and now I couldn't stop. Too gay for straight people. Not gay enough for the LGBTQ+ community. Always in this in-between space where nobody really sees me. They just see what they want. My voice got stronger, steadier. Then I walked into your class and I saw you. Not Professor Harmon. Not the guy with all the answers. I saw the loneliness. I saw someone just as tired of faking as I am. The silence between us changed. Not uncomfortable anymore. Just two people who finally stopped performing and were just being. Real. Honest. I stayed after class, I said, voice lower now. Because I see you. Not Professor Harmon. You, David, and you looked like you needed to be seen. He closed his eyes. When he opened them, there were tears not falling, but there. Real. You don't know, he whispered. How long since someone actually saw me? I don't know who moved first. Maybe me, maybe him. Both, probably. But suddenly the distance, professional, age, teacher, and student all smaller. So much smaller. We stood there in the silence, and for the first time in years, both of us, we weren't alone. The moment stretched forever and lasted a second. I could hear my heart. I could feel the weight of what we just said, confessions you can't take back. Truths that changed everything. He cleared his throat, not like a professor, just nervous, human. I shouldn't have said all that, he started, but I cut him off. Yes, you should. I'm glad you did. He looked at me like he was deciding something, weighing something big. Then, want to talk more? He asked. Outside here, outside all this class and teacher stuff. My heart jumped, because that wasn't casual. That was crossing a line, a boundary shift. Like coffee, he continued. And there was vulnerability in it, like he was risking rejection, or a walk. Just talk, like people, not teacher and student. I should have said no. Should have kept the professional distance. Should have remembered he was 50, I was 23, and it was complicated in every way. But I didn't, because in that moment, in that empty classroom on a Thursday, we weren't teacher and student. We were two lonely people who finally found someone who actually saw, someone who understood, and maybe, just maybe, that was everything. Yes, I said, I'd like that. He smiled, not the polite teacher smile, not the professional one he used in class. A real smile that made his eyes crinkle and made him seem, for the first time since I'd met him, light. Friday, he said, at 3. There's a coffee shop off campus, far enough away that no one will see us as teacher and student. Just as us. Just as us. Those words echoed in my head as I picked up my backpack. As I said goodbye, as I left that classroom and walked down the empty hallway. Just as us. But who were we? What did it mean? What happened when we crossed that line, stepped outside the classroom structure, the roles? I didn't know. But as I left and the afternoon sun hit my face, I knew one thing. Everything changed that Thursday. No going back. The next Thursday, at 3, I stood in front of the coffee shop. Discreet, 2 blocks past campus, where students never went. That said everything. We weren't trying to be seen. He showed up 3 minutes later in that brown jacket I'd memorized, and when he saw me, his whole face lit up. Not a professional smile. Real. And my stomach did that thing I'd been ignoring for weeks. You came, he said, like he doubted I would. Of course, you owe me a foamy latte. He laughed. I'd never heard him laugh like that. In class he smiled, sure, but always controlled. This was different. This was real. First 15 minutes were awkward. We sat by the window, and I didn't know what to do with my hands. Neither did he. We fiddled with cups, talked safe, weather, traffic, my coffee's foam. Look, I finally said, we don't have to pretend this is mentoring. He stopped stirring. Looked at me. No? No, you wanted to be here. With me, I wanted that too. For a second, I thought I'd crossed a line. Then he sighed, and something in him relaxed. Right, he said. I wanted your company. Not as a professor, just me. That was it. The wall came down. Then we really talked. He told me why he became a professor, about the book he'd been writing for 5 years and never finished. I told him why I chose literature, about my family, that I had no clue what came after graduation. You have time, he said. You're young. You've got forever. What about you? 50. Do you feel like you have time? It came out heavier than I meant. He was quiet, staring at his empty cup. Sometimes it feels like time's passed, he said quietly. I made choices, built this life, and now I just exist. No questions. No wanting more. And now? He looked at me. Now I'm not sure. I didn't know what to say, so I didn't. Just sat in it, that silence full of everything unsaid. When we left, he wanted to walk. We wandered aimlessly through streets around the shop, talking everything and nothing. When we said goodbye on the corner, I knew we'd do this again. We did. Every Thursday at 3. Same coffee shop. Same table by the window. Our ritual. And the more we met, the harder it was to pretend it was just friendship. Third week, we were laughing at some joke I can't remember, and when I reached for sugar, his hand was there too. Our fingers touched. A second. Less, but electric. I froze. He froze. Then we both pulled back like we'd touched fire. Sorry, he said quick. No, we stopped. Looked at each other. I saw his panic because I felt it too. Because we both knew. Not accidental. Intentional. Some part of us both wanted that touch. After that, conversation was tense. Forced. Like we were trying to get back to safety and couldn't find it. When we left, he didn't offer to walk. Just see you next week and left. I stood on the sidewalk, heart racing, thinking, what am I doing? But the next Thursday, I was there. So was he. We didn't talk about the touch. Just continued. Like we could ignore the elephant. Like it was still just platonic. But I knew I was lying. Every night in bed, I thought about him. How he smiled at my jokes. How he tilted his head when listening. His laugh. And I wondered, is this wrong? To feel this? Want this? He was my professor. He was 50. I was 23. Rules said it was inappropriate. But with him, none of it mattered. I'd tell myself just a connection. Just friendship. Two people who enjoy talking. But I was lying. Friends don't get butterflies when someone walks in. Friends don't memorize every laugh detail. Friends don't stay up thinking about the next conversation. I was falling. And I didn't know how to stop. 5th week, something shifted. We talked about a book we both loved, and I commented on how the author captured loneliness. Surrounded by people, completely alone. You ever felt that? I asked. Long pause. He nodded. Every day, he said. Until lately. What changed? He looked at me. Really looked. And for the first time, I saw something unguarded, vulnerable, honest. You, he said. My heart stopped. Me? These Thursdays, these talks, you make me feel alive. Like I'm not just going through motions. I couldn't breathe. He just said what neither of us would admit. Professor. Daniel. Just Daniel. I repeated his name, and it felt strange and perfect. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything. I needed you to know this. He gestured between us. Means something. A lot. I nodded, throat tight, because it meant everything. More than I could say. When we left, we walked side by side through empty streets, and everything had changed, and nothing changed. He'd said he felt something. But what now? That night, I called my best friend, told her everything. Thursday's talks, the touch, the confession. You're in love with him, she said immediately. No, you are. And he's in love with you. Silence. Hearing it said made it real. Scary. But he's your professor, she said. And he's 50. Are you sure? No, I admitted. About anything. Except with him I feel complete. Like everything fits. So what'll you do? I don't know. But I knew I couldn't stop. Couldn't forget. It had gone too far. As the semester went on, I realized time was ending. 6 weeks left, classes done, I'd no longer be his student. The barrier would vanish. Then what? When there were no excuses? When fear was all that stood between us? Second to last Thursday, he was different. Tense. Carrying something heavy. What's wrong? I asked. I've been thinking, he started slowly, about when the semester ends. My heart raced. And? I have a choice. Keep pretending this is just friendship. Or? He looked at me. Admit this is more than I thought I could feel. I couldn't breathe. Daniel, I know it's complicated. 1,000 reasons it shouldn't happen. But I can't pretend anymore. Me neither, I admitted. I feel it too. We sat there looking at each other, and it was terrifying and perfect. What do we do? I asked. I don't know, he said honestly. But we figure it out. Together. For the first time in weeks, I believed this could actually happen. But there was still 1 week of class. 1 week where he was my professor and I was his student. 1 week where anything between us was forbidden. And as I walked back to campus that afternoon, a question echoed in my mind. When the semester ends, when all the barriers fall, will we finally have the courage to admit what this really is? Or will fear win? The last class arrived on a Thursday in December. He was explaining a poem about unrequited love. A poem I was sure he'd chosen on purpose. And when he reached the final verse, his voice faltered. It was just a second, an almost imperceptible tremor. But I heard it. Everyone else in the room was distracted, putting away notebooks, thinking about the holidays. But I was watching him, and I saw the exact moment his mask slipped. When class ended, he didn't look at me. For the first time in months, he completely avoided my gaze. And that's when I knew. He was feeling the same thing I was. And he was terrified. The semester officially ended 3 days later. I was no longer his student. The barrier had fallen. But suddenly, I felt more distant from him than ever. The first few days were strange. I expected to feel free, relieved, but all I felt was empty. For months, I had a legitimate excuse to be near him. Office hours, questions about assignments, discussions about literature. Now, there was no reason, no justification, and for the first time, I realized how those hours in his office had become the most important part of my days. He was feeling it too, I knew, because for the first 4 days, he didn't send a single message. Nothing. And we always exchanged messages, articles, book recommendations, random thoughts. His silence was deafening. On the 5th day, I couldn't take it anymore. I picked up my phone, typed, deleted, typed again. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear my pulse in my ear. Finally, I hit send. I miss our conversations. Can we meet? 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. I was literally holding my breath. His answer, when? We arranged to meet in his office. Neutral territory now. It was no longer his room and the student. It was just 2 adults meeting. But when I arrived, my hand was trembling as I knocked on the door. Come in. He was sitting in the same chair as always, but he looked different. Tired. His eyes had a shadow I'd never seen before, and when he looked at me, there was nothing of the professor in that gaze. It was just pure vulnerability. Hi, I said, because my brain had forgotten how to form complete sentences. Hi. He gestured to the chair opposite the desk. Sit. I sat. The silence was thick, heavy. Neither of us knew how to begin. He took a deep breath. I shouldn't have agreed to see you. My stomach dropped. Why? Because he ran a hand through his hair, a gesture I'd seen 1,000 times when he was struggling to find the right words. Because I've spent the last 5 days trying to convince myself that what I feel is appropriate, professional, platonic. He laughed humorlessly, and I failed miserably. My heart was racing now. What do you feel? He looked at me directly. And in that moment, all the barriers, age, position, fear, everything disappeared. I've been lying to myself, he said, his voice low and raw. About what this is. About what I want. He leaned forward, elbows on the desk, hands clasped. I don't want mentorship. I don't want intellectual friendship. I want you. And that terrifies me. The air left my lungs. I had imagined this moment so many times, dreamed of it. But hearing the actual words from his mouth was completely different. Me too, I whispered. He shook his head. You don't understand what you're saying. Yes, I do. You're 23. I'm 50. You have a whole life ahead of you. And I want you in it. He stopped, looked at me as if I had just spoken another language. I've spent the last few months, I continued, my voice growing firmer, trying to understand what I feel. I was afraid of the age difference, afraid of what people would think, afraid that maybe it was just admiration, or confusion, or whatever. I leaned forward. But it's not. I've never felt so seen by anyone. So understood. You don't treat me like I'm too young to have opinions, or too inexperienced to understand the world. You treat me as an equal. And I feel like I've spent my whole life waiting to feel this way. He was looking at me with an intensity that made my skin tingle. You don't know what you're asking for, he said softly. People will judge. They'll say I took advantage of you, that I used my position. You didn't use anything. I came to you. You were my student, was past tense. I'm not anymore. I held his gaze. Are you going to spend the rest of your life punishing yourself for something that isn't wrong? What if I ruin your life? What if you're not in my life? That would be ruining it. He closed his eyes. I could see the conflict on his face, desire battling fear, loneliness fighting guilt. And then, slowly, he opened his eyes and looked at me in a way that made my heart stop. This is selfish of me, he said. You're young. You should be with someone your own age, someone who can give you... Stop. My voice came out firmer than I expected. I stood up, walked around the table, and stopped in front of him. Stop deciding what I should want. Stop thinking you know better than I do what's good for me. I took a deep breath. I'm choosing you, not for lack of options, not because I'm new and confused, but because when I think of the future, when I think of happiness, when I think of home, I think of you. He remained still, just looking at me. And then, slowly, he reached out his hand, hesitantly, as if he was waiting for me to pull back. I didn't pull back. His fingers touched mine, and in that simple touch, something broke. He pulled my hand, bringing me closer, until I was standing between his knees, looking down at the man I had spent months desiring. I'm so scared, he whispered. Me too. What if I'm not enough for you? What if you're everything? He let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob, and then his hand moved up, touched my face, his thumb tracing the line of my jaw. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. All that existed was the warmth of his hand, the way he was looking at me, as if I were something precious and terrifying at the same time. We can't go back, he said softly. If we do this, I know. Are you sure? Instead of answering, I leaned in, slowly, giving him time to pull back, to change his mind. But he didn't pull back. He pulled me down, and then we kissed. It was like nothing I had ever felt. Slow at first, hesitant. His lips were soft, careful, as if he was afraid of breaking me. But then something changed. He pulled the back of my neck, bringing me closer, and the kiss deepened. It became urgent. Years of loneliness, months of unresolved tension, weeks of denial, everything breaking at once. I put my hands on his shoulders to steady myself. My heart was beating so hard I was sure he could feel it. He stood up without breaking the kiss, pressing me against the table, and I clung to him as if he were the only solid thing in a world that had turned upside down. When we finally broke apart, we were breathless. He rested his forehead against mine, eyes closed, breath unsteady. My God, he whispered. I laughed, still dizzy. Yeah. He pulled back a little, just enough to look at me, and what I saw on his face was pure astonishment, as if he couldn't believe this had just happened, as if he had waited his whole life for this, and now didn't know what to do. We really did this, he said. We did. Silence. We just stood there, processing, reality beginning to seep through the euphoria. People will know, he said finally, if we continue this, if we are whatever we're going to be. Yes, they'll judge. Probably. He looked at me, and I saw the fear returning. Are you sure you want this? That you want this? He gestured between us. With all the challenges that will come? I held his face in my hands. I've never been sure of anything in my life, but I'm sure of this. I don't want to live wondering what if. I don't want to look back 10 years from now and think I let you go because I was afraid of what other people would think. I looked him in the eyes. Do you want this? He didn't answer immediately, just looked at me as if memorizing every detail of my face. Yes, he said finally. God help me, but yes, I do. I smiled. Then we'll figure it out. Together. He pulled me close again, kissed me once more, softer this time, but no less intense. And when we broke apart, he had tears in his eyes. I spent so much time alone, he whispered. I didn't even remember what this was like. This. You're not alone anymore. He laughed, wiping his eyes. No, I'm not. We stood there for a few more minutes, just holding each other. But eventually, reality began to weigh on us. Because now that we had crossed this line, we had to figure out what came next. So, I said, still holding him. What do we do now? He sighed. That's the question, isn't it? I pulled back enough to look at him. Can we make this work? I don't know. He ran his hand through my hair, his touch gentle. But I want to try. Even knowing what people will say? Even so. He hesitated. But we'll have to be careful. I still work at the university. If anyone thinks this started while you were my student, we didn't do anything wrong. I know. But perception matters. He looked at me, serious. I can't risk my job, and I don't want anyone to question your integrity or say you got grades for favors. The reality of the complications began to set in. This wasn't going to be simple. It wasn't going to be easy. Then we keep it private, I said. For now, until you're no longer my professor in any way. Are you willing to do that? For you? Yes. He looked at me for a long moment, and then nodded. Okay, we'll try. It wasn't a declaration of eternal love. It wasn't a promise of happily ever after. But it was a beginning, and in that moment, with the taste of him still on my lips and my heart still racing, it was all I needed. We reluctantly separated. I picked up my backpack, he straightened his rumpled shirt, and when I reached the door I looked back. He was watching me, hands in his pockets, a half smile on his face. See you tomorrow? I asked. See you tomorrow. And when I left that office, everything was different. The air was lighter, the world was brighter, because for the first time in months, I wasn't alone with my desire. He felt the same. We had chosen each other. But even as I walked across campus, grinning like an idiot, a small voice in my head whispered, "What now? How do we navigate this? How do we make this work in a world that won't understand?" Because wanting someone is easy. Building a life with them, that was the hard part. And we were about to find out exactly how hard it could be. The first few weeks were too perfect to be real. I know it's a cliche, but it was exactly that feeling of living in a bubble you never want to burst. We met in cafes far from campus, walked in parks where no one knew us, and for the first time in months, I saw him truly smile. Not that polite professor's smile, the smile of someone who was being seen. And I felt seen too. After years of dating guys my age who barely knew what they wanted for dinner, let alone in life, being with someone who truly listened to me, who remembered what I'd said 3 conversations ago, who asked, "How are you really?" and waited for an honest answer. It was intoxicating. But we knew that bubble had an expiration date. 2 months after that first night, we were at an Italian restaurant downtown. Nothing too fancy, but it wasn't hidden either. We were in that strange phase of not yet public, but not actively hiding either. A dangerous middle ground. I was telling a ridiculous story about my roommate when I felt his hand across the table. Not just near mine, holding it, fingers intertwined, thumb making that unconscious movement that people in love do. My first instinct? To look around, to see who was watching. And he noticed. Of course he noticed. "Sorry." I started to pull my hand away, but he held on tighter. "No," he said, his voice low but resolute. "I'm tired." Tired of what? Of hiding. Of acting like this. He squeezed my hand. Was something to be ashamed of. I've spent 50 years hiding in one way or another, and I don't want to do it anymore, especially not with you. My heart was racing, but not from fear. It was pride, relief, I don't know. But I held his hand back and didn't let go. It was exactly then that I saw them. A corner table, 3 people from my communications class, and one of them, Amanda, was looking directly at us with that, "Wait, is that what I think I'm seeing?" Look, I waved, tried to act casual. She waved back, but her gaze said it all. "We need to talk about this." 2 days later, the conversation came. "So, you and Professor Henrique?" Amanda didn't waste any time when she caught me in the library. "It's complicated," I said, trying to sound nonchalant. "I bet it is. Isn't he like your professor? He hasn't taught me for a semester." "But he did. And how old is he? 50. 52. She made that face. You know the face. That, "Oh really?" mixed with, "I'm not judging, but I'm totally judging" look. "Look, I'm not saying it's wrong," she continued. "Because that's always how it starts when someone is about to say exactly that it is wrong. But don't you think it's strange? The age difference, the whole power dynamic? He never used any power over me. We just connected. Okay, but connecting is one thing. Dating is another. What will your parents say? What will the university say? The university has nothing to do with this. And my parents, I'll deal with them when the time comes." But her words stuck in my head like gum on a shoe. And it wasn't just her. In the following days, I noticed the stares, the conversations that stopped when I arrived, the way some professors greeted me with that extra professional tone, as if they were proving they weren't that kind of professor. And Henrique was feeling it too. He didn't say much, but I noticed. The way he tensed up when we ran into someone he knew, how he let go of my hand a second before we turned a busy corner. The bubble had burst. 3 weeks after the conversation with Amanda, we had our first real fight. We were at his apartment, making dinner. I was chopping onions and he was making sauce when he blurted out, "Maybe we should take a break." The knife froze in midair. "What?" "Not permanent," he hastened to say. "Just a break. For you to think." "Think about what?" "I already know what I want." "You're 22. How can you know?" And that's what ignited the anger in me. That specific anger when someone treats you like a child exactly when you're trying to be an adult. "No, you're not going to do this again." "Do what?" "Decide for me. Decide what I feel, what I want, what's best for me. You did that in that office when you sent me away, and now you're doing it again." "I'm not deciding for you. I'm just being realistic." "No, you're being a coward." He recoiled as if I had hit him. "I saw how you've been this week," I continued, my voice trembling, letting go of my hand, looking at the ground when we passed someone. "You said you didn't want to hide anymore, but that's exactly what you're doing." "Because I'm thinking about you." His voice rose, and it was rare for him to raise his voice. "You should be dating someone your own age, going to parties, doing those things people in their early 20s do, not hiding in an apartment with an old man who's only going to hold you back." "Hold me back?" "Henrique, you opened doors for me. You made me feel seen for the first time in my life. Now, but what about 5 years from now? 10? When you're 32 and I'm 70? When your friends are getting married, having kids, building careers, and you have to explain why you're taking care of an old man? First, you're not old. Second, do you really think I'm that shallow? I think you're young, and I'd be selfish if I let you waste your youth with me. Waste? Now I was truly angry. Being with you is a waste? Do you know what the real waste was? The years I spent pretending to be interested in empty conversations with guys who thought maturity meant knowing how to order wine. That was a waste. He didn't answer. He just stood there, hands resting on the sink, looking out the window. And suddenly I understood. It wasn't about me. It never was. You're scared, I said, softer now. Of course I'm scared. I'm terrified. Of what? Of being selfish. Of stopping you from having the life you deserve. Of you waking up one day and realizing you wasted your best years with someone who isn't worth it. And there it was. The real wound. Not the age difference, not what others would think. His fear of not being enough. I put down the knife, washed my hands, and went to him. I turned him to face me. Enrique, do you know what my biggest fear is? What? That you'll leave me because you think you're doing me a favor. That you'll make this decision alone, without even asking me what I want. Because then, yes, you're right, you're doing it again. Deciding for me. He closed his eyes. I don't know how to make this work. Nobody does. Do you think couples the same age know? Everyone's improvising, Enrique. The difference is, we're doing it in the spotlight. What if it doesn't work out? What if it does? I held his face. What if we stop trying to predict the future and just live, one day at a time? You make it sound simple. It's not simple. It's scary as hell. But the question is, do you prefer to be scared alone or with me? He finally looked at me. Really looked at me. And I saw everything there. The fear, the hope, the love, the guilt. With you, he whispered. Always with you. We kissed right there in the kitchen, with the onion half chopped and the sauce burning on the stove. And for the first time in weeks, it felt like we were breathing properly again. That night, after we ordered pizza because dinner had turned into a disaster, we lay on his couch, my head on his chest, listening to his heartbeat. I have an idea, I said. We stop hiding. For real this time. He was quiet for a moment. What do you mean? We post a picture together. We go out holding hands. We stop acting like this is wrong when we know it isn't. People will talk. Let them talk. They're already talking. The difference is, now we'll be doing it our way, not hiding from them. I felt his chest rise and fall with a deep breath. Are you sure? Absolutely. No. But I'm more sure about us than about anything else in my life. And I'm tired of living in fear of what others think. We're not doing anything wrong. We're not, he agreed. And for the first time in weeks, I heard real conviction in his voice. So let's do this together. Without hiding, without apologizing. Just us. He kissed my forehead. Together, he repeated. Without hiding. The next day, I posted a picture of us. Nothing too obvious. Just the two of us in a cafe, smiling, with the caption, "Coffee with my favorite person." But those who needed to know, knew. The comments were mixed. Some hearts, some questions, some silences that spoke louder than words. But you know what I realized? I didn't care as much as I thought I would. Because when I looked at Enrique and saw that genuine smile, not the polite smile, not the hidden smile, but that smile of someone who can finally breathe, I knew we had made the right choice. And now? He asked that night. Now we build this for real. Not hidden, not scared. We make this work. What if it's hard? I held his hand. Then it will be hard, but hard together is better than easy alone. He intertwined his fingers with mine. Together, he said. And this time, when we walked down the street holding hands, neither of us let go. Because we had finally understood. The world would have an opinion anyway. The only opinion that mattered was ours. And we had decided this was worth it. We were worth it. Now it was about figuring out how to build a real life from that decision. A life that wasn't just about resisting judgment, but about creating something beautiful despite it. And that part we'd have to figure out together. A few months later, we were in his kitchen, now our kitchen making breakfast. He was scrambling eggs, I was cutting fruit. It was a dance we already knew by heart. He'd place his coffee cup in the exact spot where I always reached for it. I knew he preferred his toast crispier than it should be. Small rituals that become the silent language of a shared life. Will you come to the college's end-of-year dinner with me? He asked, stirring the eggs with that excessive concentration he always had when he was nervous. It's formal. The dean will be there. Other professors. Their wives, their husbands. I stopped cutting the fruit. You want me to go? I do. He turned to face me. As my partner. Not as my former student who just happens to be there. As the person I'm building a life with. My heart raced. Are you sure? Am I scared? Of course. But I'm more afraid of hiding you. Of pretending this isn't the most real thing that's ever happened to me. He turned off the stove. I've spent too much time being invisible. I don't want to anymore. 2 weeks later, we were at the entrance of the university's banquet hall. He wore a suit. He always looked good in a suit, and I tried not to look as young as I felt. The golden lights, the sound of polite conversations, the smell of red wine and expensive canapes. His world, which I was about to truly enter. "Ready?" he whispered, holding my hand. "Ready." We walked in together, and for the first time, we didn't let go of each other's hands. The stares came immediately, some curious, others surprised, some clearly judgmental. I felt each one of them as a physical weight. But then the professor began to introduce me. "This is Gabriel, my partner. Not my friend. Not someone I know. My partner." He said it to the head of the department, to the dean, to the literature professor who had been his colleague for 15 years and never knew he was gay. Each time he said it, I saw something in him break free, as if years of shame and fear were being erased word by word. "This is Gabriel, my partner." His voice grew firmer with each repetition. More proud. An older professor, with white hair and a tired smile, shook the professor's hand and looked at me kindly. "It's good to see you happy, my friend. It was about time." And then the moment I'll never forget happened. We were near the drinks table when a woman in her 50s approached, elegant, in a navy blue dress and a warm smile. She looked at the professor, then at me, and her whole face lit up. "Is this Gabriel?" she asked, already hugging me before I could answer. "I'm Helena, his sister." "Finally!" She turned to the professor with that look only older siblings have a mix of pride and relief. "I knew you were different, lighter. Now I understand why." The professor blushed, truly blushed, like I'd never seen him before. "Hell, you don't have to make a scene." "A scene? You disappeared for decades in solitude, hid behind work and excuses, and now you show up with this beautiful boy, and you don't want me to make a scene?" She laughed, but her eyes were shining. "You're happy. Finally." And then she looked at me, held my hand firmly, and said something that still echoes in me. "I haven't seen my brother this happy in decades. Thank you for bringing him back." My throat tightened. I didn't know what to say. How do you respond to that? How do you explain that he brought you back too? "He saved me too," I managed to say. "We saved each other." She smiled, squeezed my hand once more, and then turned to the professor. "You're bringing him for Christmas, right?" "I won't take no for an answer." "I will," he replied, and his voice was strangely emotional. "We will." That night, on the way home, neither of us spoke much. He drove. I held his hand on the gear shift. The silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that exists when there's nothing left to hide. "Are you okay?" I eventually asked. He took a deep breath, smiled in a way that seemed relieved and exhausted at the same time. "I am. I'm very okay. Your sister is amazing. She always was. I was just too cowardly to let her see who I really was." He squeezed my hand. "Until you." We got home and lay on the couch without turning on the TV, doing nothing but existing there. He ran his fingers through my hair. I rested my head on his chest, listening to his heartbeat. "I think about the future," he said suddenly. "With you." I lifted my head. "What kind of future?" "The kind that involves you actually living here. Not just staying here sometimes. Living, sharing life. Waking up every day and making coffee together." He hesitated as if testing the words. "I know it's early, but I know it's what I want." My heart was beating so hard I was sure he could hear it. "I want that too." He smiled that slow, warm smile I loved. "It doesn't have to be now, but when you're ready." Maybe I'm already ready. He kissed me, slowly, as if we were sealing something bigger than ourselves. Later, as the night grew quiet and the world outside seemed distant, I thought about how I had gotten there. It had started with loneliness, his and mine. Two people floating in lives that didn't fit, pretending everything was fine. And then a Thursday. A question after class. A coffee that lasted 3 hours. A choice. He was 50 and alone. I was 22 and lost. Neither of us knew what we were doing, but we learned together. We learned that love doesn't care about age. That connection doesn't follow rules. That belonging isn't about finding someone perfect. It's about finding someone who sees you exactly as you are and chooses to stay. We weren't perfect. We still had silly arguments, who forgot to buy milk, who left the light on. We still had moments of insecurity, he worrying about the age difference, me worrying if I was good enough. But the difference was that now we faced these things together. At Christmas, I met the rest of his family. Elderly parents who at first seemed suspicious, but then, seeing how happy he was, embraced me with genuine acceptance. Nieces and nephews who asked overly direct questions. "Are you Uncle's boyfriend?" and laughed when I blushed. His sister who pulled me aside and said, "Take care of him, okay? He deserves it." I promised I would, and he took care of me too. When I had a breakdown at work, he stayed up with me until 3 in the morning, listening, advising, just being there. When I doubted myself, he reminded me who I was. When I was afraid of the future, he held my hand and said, "We'll figure it out together." In the following months, my life began to merge with his. my toothbrush next to his, my clothes mixed with his in the closet, my books on his shelves, small invasions that became our routine. One night, months after the university dinner, we were cooking together, he making pasta, I preparing the sauce, music playing softly in the background, the smell of garlic and basil filling the kitchen. He turned to me, flour on his face, and laughed. We've become a domestic cliché. The best kind of cliché, I replied. He pulled me close, kissed me with the taste of wine and tomato, and whispered, I love you. It wasn't dramatic. There was no background music or perfect scenery. It was in the kitchen, with flour on our faces and sauce simmering on the stove. But it was the most real thing I had ever heard. I love you too, I replied. And in that moment I realized this was it. This was what I had always wanted. Not grand romantic gestures, not dramatic passion that burns fast and fades, but this. The mundane intimacy of cooking together. The security of knowing someone chooses you every day. The comfort of belonging. We had both spent so much time alone that we forgot what it was like to be chosen. I thought I was saving him from loneliness. He thought he was helping me find myself. But the truth is, we saved each other. He was no longer alone. I was no longer lost. We were together. And that changed everything. So if you're wondering if it's worth it, if it's worth the risk, if it's worth being seen, if it's worth choosing connection even when it's scary, the answer is yes. Always yes. Because in the end, it's not the years that matter. It's not social rules or what others think. It's the simplest question. Do you feel chosen? Do you feel seen? If so, then it's worth everything. That Thursday when I stayed after class, I thought I was just asking a question. But in truth, I was answering one. What does it feel like to be chosen? It feels like this. Exactly like this.